Tanner Miles stepped through the aircraft door with the calm composure of a man long accustomed to the scrutinizing glances that often come with luxury spaces. His dark cashmere coat hugged broad shoulders, the collar of his crisp white shirt neatly buttoned, not a single accessory flashy, yet every step exuded a distinctly American kind of confidence. The kind black men often have to build like mental armor, layer by layer, over years of living in a world that never defaulted them the right to belong. Flight A, C792 from Chicago to Portland took off precisely at 5:45 p.m. First class had only 12 seats, upholstered in ash gray leather, each one its own private cocoon. Tanner didn't linger on anyone's face. He didn't need to. His eyes, trained since his early startup days as an engineer, knew how to discern who was being warmly welcomed and who was treated like a stranger. Seat 1D, a front row spot right by the aisle. When he arrived, the flight attendant was cheerfully chatting with a white couple seated in 1A and 1C. Tanner waited through 3 calm breaths. No one looked at him. No one said hello. Silently, he tucked his carry-on beneath the seat and sat down. That was when the first look came, not a welcoming one. It came from Brooklyn Hayes, the lead flight attendant, around 30, blonde hair pulled back, lips pressed slightly as if hiding something. She walked up to his seat without a smile, didn't use his name, didn't ask for his drink order. She simply held out a moist towel, not warm, not scented, no silver tray like the one she had just offered the man in seat 1 minutes earlier. Tanner took it. "Thank you," he said, voice low and even. Brooklyn had already turned to leave. He leaned back slightly, the cold towel still in his hand. No one asked if he'd like a drink. Meanwhile, the woman in 2F was being poured champagne, accompanied by a playful line. "Are we feeling Veuve Clicquot or Krug this evening?" A moment of silence passed. Tanner opened his tablet, quickly scrolling through Q2 reports from his private asset management firm. In the corner of the screen, the airline's logo, Ascendia Air, glowed within an internal app accessible only to top shareholders. Tanner Miles, the man in seat 1D, was the controlling shareholder of Ascendia Air, a secret investment made 3 years ago after he exited the startup world to enter a new phase. Observing the system from within, he didn't need anyone to know that. He wanted to see exactly how a black passenger, unfamous, no VIP tag, would be treated. And today, like so many times before, the answer came quickly. 15 minutes passed. Every other passenger in first class had been offered a drink, except him. Tanner wasn't angry. He simply reached up and pressed the call button. A routine gesture, but in this unspoken hierarchy, it could easily be labeled as drawing attention. Brooklyn returned. Same neutral expression. "Yes, sir?" Tanner tilted his head slightly, keeping a polite smile. "I believe I haven't received my pre-ordered drink. I had requested a Glenrothes 18, should be in the reservation notes." She glanced at the side screen in the cabin, tapped nothing. "I don't see that order. Maybe a system glitch. We don't have Glenrothes today." "Really?" Tanner opened an email on his tablet, tilted it toward her. The reservation confirmation clearly displayed, including the drink request. "Could you double-check? It's noted here." Brooklyn glanced at it briefly, lips tightening. "As I said, we're not carrying that today. If you'd like, I can offer you orange juice." Her words landed like a cold comma. Tanner gave a faint smile. "I'll wait a little longer." She nodded slightly, turned, leaving behind a scent of perfume, soft but sharp. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Everything worth recording had already been made clear through the smallest of actions. In this modern aircraft cabin, Tanner knew exactly where the discrete cameras were placed, part of a system he had recommended just a year ago after more than 14 complaints from minority passengers. None of them had enough proof. Now every glance, every word, every decision had eyes to witness, ears to remember. Tanner turned his head toward the window. The plane was gently taxiing. Cabin lights dimmed according to takeoff procedure, while other passengers raised champagne flutes and chatted softly. He sipped the air like a man measuring the chill of the towel from earlier, not to refresh, but to remember. One day that towel might be the opening line in a historic investigation. But today it was simply the first symbol of something very old and very real that still lived in first class. And Tanner Miles, though seated exactly where he belonged, was still treated as if no one recognized he had paid part of himself for that seat. The aircraft had just reached cruising altitude when a soft ding sounded, the signal allowing cabin service to begin. Tanner adjusted his seatbelt, folded his tablet, and slid it into the armrest compartment. He was familiar with this stage, the daily rituals of flight, where food, drinks, and glances were handed out not just by seat number, but by skin color, attitude, and the personal impressions of the one holding the tray. Brooklyn Hayes began at the back row, as if deliberately delaying her arrival at his seat. At each row, she lingered just long enough, beaming smiles, graceful posture, chatting in soft, friendly tones. The man in 2A, maybe around 50, Rolex watch, East Coast accent, was offered two types of wine with a polite comment. The Merlot pairs better with the steak. The woman in 1F, or blonde hair, Hermes bag resting on her arm, was asked, "Would you like cashews or almonds? We also have chia seed bread today, right up your alley." Tanner sat still, his eyes angled out the oval window. No one greeted him. No one asked what he preferred. When Brooklyn finally reached seat 1D, there was no smile left, no trace of warmth. Just a metal tray sliding onto his fold-down table, a plastic cup of orange juice. No ice, no orange slice, no explanation. "This is your drink," she said quickly, as if trying to get out of his reach. "I didn't order orange juice," Tanner replied calmly, his eyes resting on her face. "I believe I requested Glenrothes 18. "We're out," Brooklyn shot back, even more curt than before, this time without meeting his gaze. Tanner nodded slightly. He didn't push back, didn't ask further. He simply pulled out his phone, opened the company's encrypted internal messaging app, and typed, "To Leah subject, Flight 792. Message, something worth documenting. Stay silent for now. Activate system if needed. Message sent." He slipped the phone back into his inner coat pocket. 10 minutes later, the snack service began. Small silver trays opened up, bringing mixed nuts, French butter cookies, truffle butter, and white wine to every seat, except 1D. Instead, Brooklyn approached and placed a single snack packet on Tanner's table, bearing the airline logo, the kind reserved for economy class. A thin plastic wrap sealed at both ends, containing a few mass-produced salted crackers. She said nothing. He didn't ask. The atmosphere in first class resembled a silent theater, where everyone played a role, but only one character had been denied the script. Tanner picked up the packet, turned it slowly in his hand. The cabin lights reflected off the plastic. He peeled back one corner and sniffed. No scent except indifference. Across the aisle, the man in 1C, eating a caramel-topped pastry, glanced over, then quickly looked down. No one dared to speak, but their eyes, their fleeting looks, and sudden evasions said enough. Tanner leaned back in his seat, the relaxed posture of someone well acquainted with being quietly placed in a different category. But inside, every detail was being recorded. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, revealing a Garmin watch synced with the cabin monitoring system. On its small screen, a symbol blinked. Cabin camera flagging abnormal behavior. Discrepancy in service based on customer identity. No one on this flight knew that each camera in first class had been upgraded 6 months ago, under the quiet recommendation of a strategic investor who sought to monitor service quality and invisible bias. Tanner, now being treated as a difficult passenger, was the architect of that very policy. Brooklyn walked to the rear again, her voice suddenly cheerful as she served the last rose. "Isn't the weather beautiful up here today, everyone? So glad we're flying under these perfect skies." She laughed. She tilted her head. She gently touched the shoulder of passenger 2B while setting down a cocktail. And at seat 1D, where a black man sat in silence, she left nothing but a mute cup of orange juice. He wasn't thirsty, but he was waiting. Waiting for the silence to last long enough that it could no longer be explained away as a mistake. Waiting for other passengers' eyes to start sensing something was off. Waiting for the recording system to collect enough data. Inside Tanner's coat pocket was a folder. Inside that folder, 17 formal complaints the airline had once refused to process, citing lack of evidence. Today he wasn't here just to fly. He was here to prove that some things can't be hidden forever behind polite apologies and performative smiles. And sometimes injustice doesn't arrive as a slap. It arrives as the way a glass of orange juice is placed on a table. 3.0 First Class was pleasantly quiet as the service lights shifted to a warm amber glow, signaling lunchtime in the sky. The air filled with the scent of butter, truffle, and seared beef. Tanner looked up, inhaled softly. The aroma was real, precise, procedural, but none of it was meant for him. Brooklyn was pushing the meal cart up from the rear of the cabin, smiling and chatting with each passenger like a seasoned performer working a small stage. "Mr. Thompson, here's your medium rare Wagyu steak, just as requested, and your Chardonnay, perfectly chilled." Her voice rang out like a crystal bell. The man in seat 2A nodded with a grin, patting her hand, the scene warm, elegant, and carefully curated. Tanner wasn't hungry, he was observing. Every passenger was asked for preferences, given wine suggestions, had their trays placed with precision, and topped with white silk napkins folded like fans. And him? When the tray reached Tanner's seat, Brooklyn didn't smile. She didn't introduce the meal, didn't ask, "What would you like, sir?" She simply placed a bare tray on the fold-down table. No silk napkin, no silverware, no wine. On it sat a cold sandwich, the bread already curling at the edges. The white flour dust had turned yellow at the rim, a sign of something no longer fresh. A small plastic cup of apple juice. No ice, not chilled, no explanation. He looked up. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up?" he asked, his voice light as breath. Brooklyn didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the trays on her cart, eyes not meeting his. "You're not on the special list." "Special list?" Tanner tilted his head, still calm. "Today's chef's table service is only for Platinum Plus passengers or those pre-designated," she replied, her voice flat as cold metal. Tanner nodded slightly, not reacting, but his eyes drifted to the tray beside him. A woman around 30 enjoying seafood risotto on a porcelain plate stamped with the airline's logo, a glass of red wine, gleaming stainless steel cutlery. He recognized her, a passenger who had booked just 2 days ago. Not on any priority list, according to the passenger data he had previously reviewed. He gently opened his tablet, keeping the screen angled away. A single swipe. Passenger verification mode activated. The screen displayed the first-class manifest, membership levels, flight history, and pre-selected meal options. Tanner Miles, Sapphire Black member, the highest tier, had pre-ordered the special meal. Chef's seared halibut with saffron butter, a week in advance. Confirmed. QR-coded, digitally signed. And he'd just been served a cold sandwich, the kind handed out in economy during overnight flights. He picked up a corner of the bread between 2 fingers, rotated it slightly. The cabin lighting caught the underside, revealing faint gray-blue blotches. He brought it closer, the unmistakable, subtle scent of mold. This was no mix-up. This was humiliation, meticulously delivered, cold, deliberate. He placed the bread back on the tray, said nothing. He opened his jacket pocket, removed a personal silk handkerchief, and gently wiped his fingers, as if brushing off dust that didn't belong on him. Brooklyn had already moved on, smiling at the passenger in 1F. Today's brioche was handmade, filled with foie gras, absolutely decadent. Tanner didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't react. He simply took his phone and typed a short message. "Leah, moldy sandwich. We have cameras, right?" Message sent. Delivered, confirmed. He leaned back, inhaled softly. Across the aisle, the man in 1C turned to look at him. A little too long, then quickly turned away. People always see, but don't want to get involved. A while later, Brooklyn returned to collect trays. She saw the untouched sandwich. Her eyes brushed over Tanner with detached neutrality. "Didn't suit your taste, sir?" "The bread is moldy," Tanner said clearly, locking eyes with her. She raised an eyebrow, bent slightly to feign inspection. "Oh, I don't see anything. Maybe you're mistaken." He said nothing more, just looked at her, a look without blame, without plea, just a look that said clearly, You picked the wrong person to disrespect. Brooklyn turned away. No apology, no replacement meal. He reopened his tablet, accessed the emergency reporting system, sent a live clip captured 10 minutes ago. A passenger served food not meeting basic safety standards. For the first time during the flight, his hand gripped the armrest, lightly, not out of anger, but because this was the moment he chose not to stay silent anymore. And in his mind, a question began to echo. Who gets to define priority in this world? And why must people like me keep proving we deserve the seat we already paid for? The cabin remained quiet. The hum of the engines was steady, like a permanent background soundtrack. No one looked at Tanner. No one spoke to him. And that, too, was part of what he was collecting. The collective silence, that frequent accomplice to injustice. Tanner sat still, his gaze fixed on the silver curtains separating the galley from the first-class cabin. Beyond it, Brooklyn's voice echoed, faint but not faint enough to evade the cabin's surveillance system Tanner himself had once designed. And now he was the first passenger ever to activate emergency audio capture from a personal seat. On his tablet, a red icon lit up. The internal interface displayed the message, Audio Capture, Section A, Active. He plugged in his earbuds, though only to give the illusion of listening to music. Every sound being captured was already uploading in real time to a private cloud server. Maximum encryption, zero crew access. And then, what he heard was everything the world had long suspected, but never had the evidence to prove. Derek, I'm telling you, I'm so done with these kinds of passengers. Brooklyn's voice, low but laced with venom. Who do they think they are? Platinum or not, you can tell they don't belong in first class. Like skin color is some kind of boarding pass. Yeah, that kind just knows how to beg for special treatment. Derek's voice, young, smug. Exactly, they don't know their place. Had one on the LAX flight, said he was a CEO or something, but looked like a damn security guard. Eyesore. I bet this guy's flying on reward points or some kind of diversity upgrade. Ha, probably. These days, you can't even say it's discrimination or you'll get sued, so best we can do is give them exactly what they deserve. Tanner listened, not with anger. Strangely, he wasn't even shocked. He'd heard these words before, from investor boards, from senior executives, from his own clients, when they assumed no one was recording. The difference was, today, every word was being preserved. He opened another tab on his tablet and quickly drafted a secure internal email. To Savannah Lynn, subject urgent, cabin audio, flight 792, attachment, AutoStream 4, a 1412 to 1418, wave note, direct transcript of racial remarks made by F.A. Brooklyn Hayes and F.A. Derek. Verified audio, legal backup in vault, no lengthy explanations. Tanner didn't need them. Savannah, global director of HR, would understand. They had an unspoken agreement. When Tanner sent material, Savannah would take care of the rest. He tapped send. The status icon turned green. Then he sat still, just as before. No one in the cabin knew that an investigation was now taking off, midair. No one could have guessed that the man being ignored held in his hands the evidence that could suspend the entire crew within hours. Tanner removed his earbuds, stretched slightly. Brooklyn had just emerged from behind the curtain, her smile instantly returning as she greeted the passenger in 1A. And when her eyes swept past seat 1D, Tanner met her gaze, said nothing, showed no expression. But in that moment, for the first time during the flight, Brooklyn hesitated. Something stirred in her, a vague intuition, that something wasn't right, that the man in 1D might not be the difficult passenger she thought he was, but someone she would soon have a lot to answer to after landing. She didn't know it yet, but Tanner, he didn't need to know anything more. Because sometimes to expose the truth, you don't need to speak. You just need to know when to hit record. A gentle clattering echoed through the cabin. The final meal tray had been cleared. The lights held their soft, amber glow, as if everything was unfolding normally. But the air around seat 1D told a different story. Tanner sat upright, placing his tablet on the tray table. His expression remained steady, but his spine had already braced for confrontation. The audio recording had been sent. The automatic analysis was running, And for the first time in the 47 minutes since takeoff, he pressed the call button, not for a flight attendant, but to request the captain. Moments later, Derek appeared, that same emotionless, digital smile still painted on his face. "Sir, is there a problem?" "I'd like to speak with Captain Elliot Green," Tanner said calmly. "I have a serious service issue that needs to be formally recorded." Derek paused slightly. "Sir, the captain is currently in the cockpit." "I'm aware," Tanner cut in, still courteous. "But according to Ascendia's passenger service and safety policy, in cases of a Level 3 complaint, passengers have the right to request direct interaction with the captain, and I believe the present situation qualifies." Derek said nothing. He turned away. Tanner waited. 2 minutes later, the silver curtain pulled back. A tall man, salt and pepper hair, pilot uniform crisp, Captain Elliot Green, entered with the calm demeanor of someone who believed he was always right. "Sir," he began, eyes flicking toward the seat nameplate. "Mr. Miles, I've been told you have a concern?" Tanner stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to meet the man eye to eye, the man representing the entire system operating in the skies. "That's correct," Tanner said. "I received service that didn't match what I paid for. I wasn't served my pre-ordered meal, was instead given spoiled food. I was clearly treated differently from other passengers. And when I asked why, I was told I wasn't on the priority list." Elliot's face remained unreadable. "I understand you're dissatisfied, but we do reserve the right to adjust service based on situational logistics." "I understand that," Tanner replied, "but logistics doesn't include serving a moldy sandwich to a platinum black first-class passenger, while someone who booked just yesterday gets foie gras and premium wine." Elliot's voice stiffened. "Are you accusing my crew of discriminatory intent?" "I'm not saying that," Tanner said softly. "I'm just stating facts. And according to safety policy, when there are signs of severe bias, passengers have the right to request documentation and escalation to operations." For the first time, Elliot blinked. Clearly, he hadn't expected the difficult passenger to know policy this well. And then, instead of responding appropriately, he went on the offensive. "Mr. Miles," Elliot said, lowering his voice, "I am responsible for the safety of every person on this aircraft. If your behavior, whether through demands or tone, jeopardizes the order of this cabin, I have the authority to initiate an emergency landing." Silence. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. A few nearby passengers began to glance over. One lowered their magazine, another removed their headphones. Tanner didn't respond immediately. He only tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on Elliot. "You're threatening to land the plane," he repeated, "because a passenger requested the service he paid for?" "Because you're creating tension," Elliot emphasized. "It's my job to keep order on this flight." "And your method of keeping order," Tanner replied, his tone now unmistakably pointed for the first time, "is to threaten removal of the person who speaks up?" "No one's being removed," Elliot deflected, but his expression cracked. "As long as their behavior is appropriate." Tanner took one step back, not retreating, but making space for his next line. "Then perhaps you could explain," he said clearly, "which part of my behavior is inappropriate. Have I shouted, caused a scene, or have I simply asked a question, one that you, frankly, should be asking your own crew?" The cabin was dead silent. Elliot took a second, then adjusted his collar. "I'll leave it to the crew to follow up. Thank you for sharing." And he turned away. Tanner watched him go. No hatred, no smile, no sense of victory. Only one feeling. It was time. A soft clatter rippled through the cabin, signaling that the last meal tray had been cleared. The cabin lights remained a warm, gentle amber, as if everything was unfolding just fine. But the air around seat 1D was different. Tanner sat upright, tablet on the tray table. His face betrayed nothing, but his posture had prepared itself for a confrontation. The audio recording had been sent. The auto analysis was underway. And for the first time in the 47 minutes since takeoff, he pressed the call button. Not for a flight attendant, but to request the captain. The recent clash with Captain Elliot Green had shifted something in the room. No one said it aloud, but every glance had changed. If at first Tanner was just another black man complaining too much, now his silence was making people wonder, who's really being disruptive here? Tanner didn't say another word. He returned to his seat, opened his tablet, resumed taking notes, though his eyes continued scanning the cabin. That confrontation wasn't to provoke. It was a test. And the real reaction didn't come from the man he confronted, but from the people seated silently all around him. Eliza Monahan, 60 years old, neatly cropped silver hair, gray-blue linen dress, seated in 1A, just beside Tanner, was the first to break that silence. "I saw it all, you know." Her voice was raspy but clear, not loud, but resolute. Tanner turned, mildly surprised. She leaned closer, eyes not angry, just heavy. From the lukewarm towel, to the orange juice, to the moldy sandwich, I sat here, I saw every moment, and I kept wondering, why isn't anyone saying anything, even me? Tanner nodded gently. Because silence is always the first response, but silence is still a choice. "Not today," she said, lifting her head to glance around. "Not today." In the row behind Tuba, a young man about 25 was quietly live streaming with his phone propped against the meal tray. On screen, live 182 viewers. Within minutes, the number surged. He spoke softly. "This is Flight A, C792, Ascendia Airlines. The man in seat 1D was served a moldy sandwich. When he asked for answers, they threatened to kick him off the plane. Captain just walked away. No apology." Comments poured in. "You gotta be kidding me? First class? Like that? This better hit the news." A passenger in 2B leaned over. "What are you doing?" "Documenting the truth, man," the young man replied without lowering the camera. Brooklyn returned, still pushing the beverage cart. But her face was different now. She spotted the live stream. Eyes widened. Her step faltered. "Excuse me," she snapped. "You're not allowed to film inside the cabin. Airline policy." The young man looked up, calm. "I'm not filming people. I'm filming the food, the moldy sandwich, and the foie gras tray. Pretty sure that's not against the rules." "You're violating other passengers' privacy," Brooklyn said louder now, starting to draw attention. From seat 1C, a middle-aged man raised his phone. "If he's in violation, so am I." "Me too," said the woman in 2D, already holding up her iPhone. "This is evidence. We've been silent long enough." Brooklyn turned, scanning their faces, and she saw something strange. The polite customer smiles were gone. In their place, alert, unflinching stares. Then Captain Elliot reappeared, not because he was summoned, but because he knew the silence had collapsed. "All right," he said, voice lowered. "Everyone please remain seated. Let's not escalate this." "We're not escalating," Eliza replied, turning to face him. "We're witnessing, and for the first time, we're not looking away." No one applauded, no one cheered, but something more powerful than noise began to take shape. Solidarity. Elliot looked around. The passengers he'd dismissed now filming, murmuring to one another, speaking volumes with their eyes. And he understood. He no longer controlled this space. Tanner remained seated. No phone, no live stream. He didn't need it, because when others began telling the story for him, he was no longer alone. For the first time, Tanner allowed himself a small smile. Not because he had won, but because the fight was no longer his alone. Tanner Miles sat still, but the system he once built had already begun to move. On his tablet screen, the sync icon turned green. The audio file labeled AutoStream 4 of 1412 to 1418, the conversation between Brooklyn and Derek, had just been uploaded to Ascendia Air's executive operations system. Tanner didn't need to say another word. Everything that needed saying was contained in those 6 minutes of sound. He typed 3 letters, SAV. A message window opened. Savannah Lynn, HR Executive Director. He simply wrote, Replay 4A-1412. Cabin audio. Flight 792. Immediate action recommended. Less than 30 seconds later, a reply signal blinked. Savannah Lynn. Pulling all cabin cam footage now. Ops command notified. All data will be routed directly to Flight Command Center within 3 minutes. Stay in position. Tanner leaned back, eyes still looking out the window. But behind him, the system was now moving faster than any flight he'd ever taken. In the cockpit, Captain Elliot Green had just been informed by the co-attendant that headquarters wants a direct link. He frowned, removed his secondary headset, and switched to the encrypted internal channel. This is Captain Green. Repeat the directive. A woman's voice came through. Cold, clear. Savannah. Captain Green, we've received an internal cabin audio file 4A, time-stamped 14/12 to 14/18. Contents contain confirmed racially discriminatory remarks by 2 crew members. There's evidence you acted on misleading information and attempted to intimidate a passenger. We are reviewing the possibility of replacing the entire crew upon landing. Elliot's face drained of color. I object. I was provoked. That passenger is seated quietly, not disruptive, not loud. The recording confirms a consistently calm demeanor throughout. You threatened an emergency landing for disruptive behavior, yet no evidence suggests any disruption beyond your crew. Official directive, maintain current course, no individual action until legal representation is present at arrival. Elliot said nothing. Sweat beaded at his temples. Further back, Brooklyn was trying to continue service, her face pale as chalk. She just received a message from the internal crew lead. Cabin cameras currently under review. Audio recorded behind curtain will be cross-checked with passenger reports. Prepare your written statement. Her hands shook, not from remorse, but from the realization. Everything she thought was private had been recorded. I was just joking, she muttered under her breath, as if to herself. We didn't say anything that bad. But she knew. There is no just joking in the eye of a camera. A young passenger still live streaming whispered, "She's panicking, face drained. Looks like she knows she got caught." The video spread fast. Flight 792 began trending on social media. In seat 1A, Eliza Monahan looked at Tanner with a new expression. "You spoke up, but now the whole world is listening." Tanner gave a faint smile. "The world only listens when there's proof." "And now you've got all of it," she said softly. Tanner nodded, but inside he knew a much larger battle was just beginning. In the cockpit, Elliot dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. He knew there was no way back, but deep down he still clung to something. "I'm the captain. I have the authority. I'm the only one in command up here." But today, there was something even higher than the sky. The truth. The cabin intercom chimed for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. But this time, it wasn't to remind passengers about flight safety or the weather at our destination. Instead, a strange new announcement came through. "We would like to inform you, by urgent request of Executive Command, the flight crew of AC 792 is to cease all interaction with passengers until a senior corporate representative is present at Portland International Airport. All further actions will be recorded and reviewed post-landing." No one knew exactly what was happening, but every pair of eyes slowly turned toward one seat, 1D. Tanner didn't flinch. He didn't rush. He was still on his tablet, but this time, it wasn't an email or cabin interface. It was a completely different window. A logo appeared at the center of the screen. Elite Air Executive Portal. Verified board access. In that instant, the man in seat 1C, who had once looked at Tanner with suspicion, went completely still. Because right below the logo, a line appeared. User T Miles, board ID ECT 092, access level, corporate stakeholder class. A Tanner gently tilted the screen, just enough for those nearby to see. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply let them look. And then he spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I think," he said, "it's time I properly introduced myself." Silence spread like a held breath. No one dared to interrupt. "My name is Tanner Miles. I'm one of 3 controlling shareholders of Elite Air, the airline you're flying with." A stunned whisper escaped from a seat behind. "What?" Tanner continued, his voice steady with the kind of calm only someone at the very top could carry. "I'm the one who proposed and funded the behavioral monitoring system in premium cabins, not to monitor passengers, but to protect the reputation of this airline. And more importantly, to protect fairness." His eyes shifted toward Brooklyn, then Derek, both frozen near the curtain. That system, he said, recorded every word these two crew members said about me and about passengers they didn't approve of. It recorded every syllable, every biased intent, and I've already sent it directly to command. Elliot stepped out, face ashen. You? Why didn't you say something from the start? Tanner turned, meeting the captain's eyes for the first time, not as a passenger under threat, but as someone auditing the entire crew from above. I didn't need to say anything, he replied. I needed to observe. I needed to see if I, a top-level stakeholder, stayed silent about who I was, how would I be treated when I didn't look like someone meant for first class? Elliot opened his mouth as if to speak, but he was already too late. From the back rows, a single clap rang out, then a second, then the entire cabin, not with wild cheering, not with noise, but with a growing, steady rhythm of acknowledgement, clap by clap, like a quiet bell tolling transformation. Brooklyn stood like a statue. Her hand gripped the seat so hard it turned pale. A single tear rolled down, not from regret, but from the cold realization. Every word had been recorded, and the man they had mishandled was the one who had the power to sign their suspension. Tanner bowed his head slightly. Thank you, he said. I hope today isn't remembered as a day I was accidentally mistreated, but as the day this company truly began to look at itself. The aircraft trembled lightly as its wheels touched the runway. Denver wasn't the original destination, but now it had become a place of reckoning, not just for the passengers, but for the entire operational machinery of Elite Air. No welcome cheer echoed through the cabin. No welcome to Portland. Instead, a cold, clear voice came through the internal PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight A, C792 has landed in Denver under Emergency Executive Directive. Please remain seated until further notice. A senior corporate team will be boarding shortly to address a special operational matter. First class froze, like time had been paused. The young man who had been live streaming earlier tried to steady his hand, though even he wasn't sure if he was witnessing a legal investigation or a full-scale purge. Brooklyn stood frozen beside the beverage cart, her clenched hand drained of color. Elliot remained in the cockpit, eyes locked on the control panel, as if searching for a rewind button to undo everything. Tanner sat calmly. His eyes rested on the foggy Denver skyline, gray and unremarkable. But within him, things had never felt clearer. The aircraft door opened after 7 long minutes of silence. The first to board was Savannah Lynn. Her ivory suit wasn't flashy, but her stride was sharp, like a walking indictment. Behind her, 2 tall men in Elite Air executive uniforms, not to be confused with flight attendants or security, followed closely. They were part of the Special Oversight Unit, a team that only appeared in high-level internal crises. Savannah stopped at the threshold of first class. She didn't need a script. Every word she spoke came from years of drafting emergency response protocols she hoped she'd never have to use. Mr. Miles, she nodded, her gaze steady but warm. We have received the full cabin data. The system has verified audio, visual, service conduct, and ethical violations. On behalf of Elite Air, I'm declaring immediate executive takeover of this cabin. The air in the room seemed to shift. Captain Elliot Green, Savannah turned toward the cockpit, Lead Attendant Brooklyn Hayes, and Flight Attendant Derek Grant. You are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately, under Article 14.3, High-Level Professional Ethics Violation. The cockpit door swung open. Elliot stepped out, face ghost white, all command stripped from his presence. You don't have the authority, he began. Savannah cut him off, unblinking. I do. Authorized directly by the Board of Shareholders, including one controlling stakeholder, seated in the front row. Every head in the cabin turned toward Tanner. Brooklyn trembled, lips pressed together, speechless. Derek instinctively placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, not in anger, but in collapse. Not from remorse, but from knowing what she thought were whispered remarks behind a curtain had become public evidence. The 2 executive monitors stepped forward, escorting the 3 crew members from the cabin. No handcuffs, no shouting, but the eyes of every passenger followed them, heavier than any formal sentence. Elliot passed the first row, locking eyes with Tanner. He opened his mouth, perhaps to explain, to apologize. But nothing came out. He knew now, any words would be like wind against glass. As the three disappeared behind the exit, Savannah turned back to Tanner, not as an HR official now, but as a representative of a system in the process of being rebuilt. "The board requests your statement," she said softly. "If you're ready." Tanner rose. He brought nothing with him, just himself. He walked to the front of the cabin like any other traveler, but everyone knew he was the one measuring the real value of this space. No microphone, no spotlight. "We've just witnessed something," Tanner began, his voice soft but steady. "Sometimes a moldy sandwich isn't a system error. It's a symptom of a system that's already rotting." The cabin held its breath. No one, and I mean no one, deserves to be served a moldy sandwich because of the color of their skin. Applause erupted, but this wasn't celebration. It was release. It was the nod of those who had once stayed silent. It was an unspoken apology from those who had once looked away. Tanner didn't bow. He just added one last line. Not part of any corporate handbook. Justice doesn't have to shout. It just has to be timely and undeniable. As passengers deplaned, one by one, each turned back to look at him. Some said simply, "Thank you." Some said, "I've been through that too." Some shook his hand and held it for a long time. The young man who had live streamed stepped off the plane, eyes glassy with tears, whispering into the camera. "Today I saw that justice isn't a distant thing. It happened right here, in seat 1D, on a flight someone thought belonged to them, but it didn't." And Tanner? He stood still, watching the Denver sky. Inside him, there was no feeling of victory, only the sense that something had begun. Tanner Miles stood in the center of the cabin as if it belonged to him, not because of power, but because silence had made way for truth. The tension in the air hadn't vanished, but now it felt like a drumhead, tight, waiting for a decisive strike. Not to end something, but to begin. In Tanner's hand was the tablet everyone now recognized, not just a communication device, but the control panel for a system they once believed was far removed from them. In less than 24 hours, it had redefined who truly sat at the front of the plane. He entered 3 commands, no sound effect, no dramatic animation. But what he said next made the entire cabin hold its breath. "I know this flight has affected all of us. Not just because of delays or tension," Tanner said, "but because it forced each of us to witness a truth that's hard to face. Some injustices still exist, and sometimes they wear a uniform, sit in a cockpit, or carry a name tag." Silence followed, but not the silence of apathy, the silence of attention. "And because of that," he continued, "I, Tanner Miles, controlling stakeholder of Elite Air, on behalf of this airline, extend our deepest apology to every one of you, not just for what happened, but for how long it's been allowed to happen." He took a breath, then delivered a statement no airline had ever made. "Every passenger on Flight A, C792 will receive a full refund, plus $10,000 in direct compensation, and 5 years of Elite Infinity membership, our highest tier loyalty status." There was no sound for 2 full seconds, then a whisper from the back. "Did he just say?" Then came the first applause, not scattered, not forced, but erupting, raw and real. From the young man live streaming to Eliza Monahan, from the tech worker to the mother holding her child in business class, they all rose. Not for the money, but because, for the first time, they had been treated as people who mattered. Tanner sat back down. No smile, no wave, just a quiet gaze out the window. His eyes said more than words. If one airline can do the right thing, then any organization can. His tablet pinged. Confirmed. $2.37 million compensation package approved. Internal comms initiated. HR prepared for press. Flight 792 will mark the launch of a company-wide reform campaign. At the same time, footage of Tanner's announcement began to spread like wildfire. In 12 hours, 5 million views. In 24, over 12 million. Hashtags exploded. Number Flight 792, Elite Air Justice, Moldy Bread. A bitterly clever tag coined by online communities. One comment received over 200,000 likes. That man didn't slam his fist, didn't raise his voice, but every word he spoke made an entire system stand up. The board of directors held an emergency session, and for the first time in Elite Air's history, every member voted unanimously to adopt the Miles Protocol, a new code of ethical conduct in service, requiring quarterly staff training, evaluated by independent third parties. A senior executive, who had once opposed the cabin camera initiative, issued a public apology. "I was wrong. I thought professionalism was enough. It's not. We need ethics, and we need those ethics to be verified." Tanner didn't speak to the media. Instead, he released a short clip at Elite Air's press conference. "I didn't do this to go viral. I did it to remind us. There are people who once ate a moldy sandwich and never said a word. Not because they were weak, but because they believed no one would listen. If an airline wants to soar, it must first learn how to listen from the ground." A week later, Elite Air released its public report. Bookings up 14%. Many customers citing, "I want to fly with a company that treats fairness not as a slogan, but as a process." Tanner boarded another flight, this time in economy class, seated beside an elderly man and a young boy. No one recognized him, but when the flight attendant leaned down to offer him a towel, she smiled, genuinely, and said, "Welcome aboard Elite Air, sir, and thank you for the moldy sandwich." Tanner smiled softly, said nothing, because sometimes the most beautiful form of justice is the one that doesn't need anyone's name on it. 3 days after Tanner Miles stepped off Flight AC-792, the board of directors at Elite Air convened an emergency meeting of unprecedented scale. There was no breakfast buffet, no opening speeches, just a large screen bearing a single line of text. Systemic reform. Flight 792 was only the beginning. Tanner stood at the center of the room, dressed in a simple gray suit, no tie, no name badge. But no one in that room mistook his presence. The man who once sat silently in seat 1D now stood before 19 board members, not just as a strategist, but as an architect of conscience. "We were struck right at our core values," he began, speaking without slides, without notes. "And if we only treat the surface wounds, then we'll bleed again." Quietly. He raised one hand and pressed a key. The screen displayed a chart. 78 complaints of discrimination from Black, Asian, and Indigenous passengers, set aside or resolved with vouchers over the past 5 years. 0 cases fully investigated. The room went cold, like the floor of an empty terminal. No one spoke. No one objected. Tanner looked each board member in the eye. Each of those complaints was from someone like me. Someone handed a lukewarm towel, a moldy sandwich, or a look that said, "You don't belong here." And we told them, with our silence, "Thank you for flying. Please understand. Come again." He took a breath. Number. They won't come again. Not unless we change. Not just a crew. The entire operational fabric of Elite Air. Over the next 6 hours, Tanner presented the Horizon Initiative, a sweeping plan not just for PR recovery, but for structural rebirth. First, reinvestigation of all 78 discrimination cases. A new independent task force formed, civil rights attorneys, passenger advocates, corporate ethics specialists. Each affected passenger would receive a formal invite from the CEO for a private listening session. Staff members previously protected due to lack of evidence would undergo full reviews, including off-duty behavior, if relevant. 2. Customer review system redesigned, eliminating all bias cues, all names, addresses, and regions anonymized during service scoring. Passengers identified by randomized ID numbers. Identity revealed only after feedback is fully processed. Praise, complaints, and reviews run through AI to detect unconscious bias patterns in internal narratives. 3. First class redefined, not as a power zone, but a fairness proving ground. All premium cabin crew to complete an anti-bias and human dignity flight training program led by an independent institute. Flight crews retrained on non-emergency judgment to prevent abuse of the safety diversion clause as a cover for bias. All premium cabins equipped with two-way encrypted surveillance, footage stored 30 days, accessible only to executive leadership and internal investigators. Fourth, creation of a public-facing accountability council. Every quarter, Elite Air to host a town hall of transparency, a global live stream session with passengers who've experienced service failures. Crew members with more than 2 passenger complaints per year required to participate in open dialogue. New performance metrics. Advancement no longer 100% based on efficiency, but partially on measurable fairness in service. One board member, Mr. Whitfield, silver-haired, once opposed to cabin cameras, now sat silent, eyes glassy. "You're not speaking like a shareholder," he said slowly. "You're speaking like someone who's been served the moldy sandwich." Tanner didn't deny it. "I'm both." Another board member asked, "What do you want from us?" Tanner looked around the room. "I want us to stop pretending data is neutral. I want this system to stop looking good and start being good." "We can't fix everything," someone sighed. "No," Tanner replied, "but we can choose where we begin." He pressed the final key. On the screen appeared the motion. "I, Tanner Miles, controlling shareholder, motion to enact the Full Horizon Initiative, with implementation to begin within 90 days. Silence. Then a raised hand. Then another. Then 10. 17 out of 19. Approved. A vote unlike any before, not for its financial scale, but for the courage of its moral vision. 1 month later. On the homepage of Elite Air, a new banner appeared. "We're learning how to serve again." Tanner didn't appear on camera. He didn't need to. Every passenger could see his imprint in every change. Whenever staff asked, "Is there anything else I can get you?" they were reminded, the person in front of you could be the next Tanner. New hires began their shifts reciting a line. "Justice doesn't have to shout. It just needs to be timely and clear." At the end of the day, Tanner opened his laptop. An email from the investigative team appeared. Of the 78 complaints, 53 show signs of intentional disregard. 12 former employees will be reinvestigated. 5 passengers have sent thank you letters for finally being heard. Tanner leaned back, eyes to the ceiling. He didn't hear applause. He didn't hear protest. He heard the quiet voice of the boy from the last flight. "Thank you for the moldy sandwich." Tanner smiled. That flight had ended, but a system was just beginning. JFK Airport was busy that morning, but calm. No more rushed, blaring, last call announcements. The lines at each boarding gate moved at a steady pace, as if everyone already knew exactly where they were going. Tanner Miles entered the VIP gate of Elite Air without showing a card. The staff only needed a glance, not out of fear and not because of fame, but because they knew. This man had once changed an airline, not through power, but through truth. Flight 347 was set to depart from New York to San Francisco, the same route as Flight AC 792 months ago. But this time, no one knew Tanner was on board. No internal alerts, no special camera. He booked the ticket like any ordinary passenger. Still seat 1D. When he entered the cabin, he was no longer the man who was ignored. He was the man who received a soft bow from the flight attendant, a smile that wasn't forced. "Welcome back, sir. Thank you for what you did. Even the parts no one ever saw." Tanner gave a small nod. He didn't need to remind anyone who he was, and he no longer needed to be remembered as a headline. He sat down and adjusted his seat. The PA system came on gently. "Elite Air welcomes you aboard Flight 347. We believe every flight is an opportunity to serve, not to determine who deserves to be here. And because of one passenger on this very route 6 months ago, we're learning how to serve again, with gratitude and fairness." No name was mentioned, but everyone in the cabin seemed to know exactly who they meant. The flight attendant returned. A meal tray was placed before Tanner, not with hesitation, but with the care of someone setting down a quiet thank you. Beneath the crisp white tablecloth was a folded letter, heavy paper, bold blue ink. "Dear Mr. Miles, when you spoke up, it wasn't just one person who was heard, but thousands who had remained silent. We reviewed the records, watched the footage, listened to every minute of audio. But what changed us wasn't the evidence. It was your composure. It was the way you chose fairness instead of retaliation. The way you didn't ask for special treatment, but simply asked why the treatment was different. Because of you, we rewrote our entire training program. We relearned what service means. And above all, we've come to understand service isn't subservience. It's how we say, I see you, I hear you. With deepest respect, the first class crew elite air. Flight 347 Tanner folded the letter and set it aside. On the edge of the white cloth napkin, folded with care, a line of hand-stitched blue thread appeared. This is not a privilege. It is fairness. He ran his fingers lightly over the edge of the fabric. It felt soft, warm, like proof that something had genuinely changed. The meal was served in full: grilled tenderloin, crisp artisan bread, fresh greens, pure juice. Nothing extravagant, but everything exactly as promised. No one asked for a photo. No one requested an interview. And Tanner didn't pull out a phone to record it. He knew the real story was now alive in how people behaved, not in any headline. 6 months later, Elite Air no longer felt like just an airline. It resembled an ethical flight organization. The anti-bias training had become the new industry standard. Cabin crews were now evaluated by passengers, but also protected from complaints rooted in prejudice. A program called Strangers Welcome was launched, prioritizing the hiring of former passengers who had once been discriminated against to become trainers. Tanner landed in San Francisco. The staff at the jet bridge didn't ask for his name, but instead of calling him Mr. Miles, the young agent simply said, "Thank you for coming back." Tanner smiled. "I'm not coming back," he replied. "I'm just continuing the journey." That evening at home, Tanner opened a folder on his laptop. Inside were thank you letters from 112 passengers, people who had flown in economy but been treated like first class. One letter was from a 9-year-old African-American girl, written in crooked handwriting. "Dear Mr. Tanner, my mom says because of you, the flight attendant called her ma'am today and not that lady." He printed that letter, taped it to his fridge, beside a wall filled with legal evidence and investment awards. Because sometimes the greatest victories come from one word being corrected. Tanner no longer needed to sit in 1D. But if one day you board an elite air flight and see a quiet black man sitting silently, needing no attention, no deference, yet receiving a look of pure respect from the crew, that might be Tanner, or it might not, because now anyone could be Tanner. You may have witnessed injustice. You may have stayed silent, thinking you didn't have the power to change anything. But the story of Tanner Miles has shown us justice doesn't have to shout. It just needs to be timely and clear. A moldy sandwich, a condescending glance, a record button pressed at the right moment. And then an entire system changed. Not just for one person, but for everyone who was ever made to feel like they didn't belong. If this story moved you, angered you, or inspired you, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, because the story you tell might just be the spark someone else needs. And if you want to keep walking this journey with us, through stories of quiet justice, human dignity, and silent kindness, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who deserves to be heard. Because sometimes one story told at the right time can change a day, a life, or a whole system. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon, on the road toward truth, justice, and quiet humanity.